Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a really great guest today. He's lived a nomadic life, raised in Calgary, Boston, and Nairobi as a child, and he graduated from Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver in 2007. Between 2014 and 2016, he attended an acclaimed German school as a guest of a distinguished influence there. Maybe you can talk more about that. Please join me in welcoming Erik Olson. Welcome, Erik.
Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you. You ready for 20 questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. Question one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Well, I'm a painter. I make paintings and sculptures and etchings, copper plate etchings, and sort of between the three of those, it gives me a lot of freedom to kind of explore topics I'm interested in. So as you mentioned, I was born in Calgary, and the following week moved to Winnipeg, and then moved to Nairobi for a while, and pretty much that has continued since. And so the projects for me, the painting projects end up being sort of like a vehicle to explore different things I'm interested in and go to different places.
Great. Just a note for our audience, we know each other from art school. I remember Erik being very kind of poised and seemingly ready to embrace the art world context. So it's super interesting to see you after all these years.
Yeah, it's great to stay connected with certain people from that time at Emily Carr, which was very formative for me. You know, I went out west when I was 18 and instantly found this totally different sort of educational situation, I suppose. And a lot of the things I learned, surprisingly, in that first year somehow come back to me, like even the color mixing class that I took with Ingrid Koenig at that time later on really influenced how I think about color. And the new drawing room, I remember going into that class and instantly I knew I was in the right place. So yeah, it's good to connect with other colleagues from that time.
Great, thanks for that. Number two is, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Well, I guess in a way, I think, everyone is unique. Everyone is different. So I suppose I try to embrace that with a lot of the work that I do. So in a way, almost all the paintings somehow come from an attempt at portraiture, whether that's, the individual person or some of the places I visit, trying to do sort of a portrait of place or landscape. So it's really, I don't know if it's something that makes me different, but I really try to search out what's unique about the different subjects that I sort of pursue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was researching you on YouTube and found this interview with you, and just kind of saw that kind of same kind of feeling, I guess, in that interview, and that consistency is super interesting, actually. Yeah. So number three is, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Well, it's somehow I suppose I think of painting and it's somehow being in concert with singing and dancing and these sort of basic forms of communication, I suppose, and it's very close to the human scale, I suppose, just making images for other people, bodies to look at and see. And I suppose I really like to try to pursue that sort of basic quality of what it is to be a human, having that at the core of what I do. If I can make that work, in the midst of all these other really fascinating topics, like it's even though what I do is very somewhat simple, paint on canvas, I try to collaborate with other people, scientists sometimes, or other sort of professionals, because I think there's so much more going on to be learned from that. But I like that sort of my project is is relatively basic in scope, in that, you know, it's going to be paintings or sculptures or prints, and people looking at them in hopefully in the real, you know, in person.
I love that you talk about it in that way. You know, I'm also interested in, it's coming up in a couple of questions, but your shifting location and how that impacts your work. Number 4 is, what does your future look like?
Well, hopefully I'll continue painting and following my interests, really, you know. But yeah, who knows what's coming up? We're living in a very interesting time, right? A very dynamic time, it seems to me. And I recently read this book by E.O. Wilson, who sort of he recently passed away, but he was for a long time the world's leading sort of ant biologist. And so he was a biologist who was really an expert on ants and how they interact. And I read this one book called The Social Conquest of Earth, and it's sort of a daunting title, but what it's really about is about these eusocial creatures, sort of the most social creatures on Earth. And there's sort of a short list of organisms that he feels kind of reaches that threshold. And so through these comparisons, it's sort of like bees and ants and termites and humans, he thinks, and there's I think a naked rat that fits the sort of the category. But it's a really fascinating book, because essentially what he tries to do is, from a biological and sort of observation-based standpoint, built on all these years of studying these animals and finding similarities to how humans interact in a social way. He attempts to, in the book, answer Gauguin's questions that he put out of, you know, where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And it's a fascinating book, and I really encourage everyone to read it if they can, because I think it gives a sort of hopeful and surprisingly optimistic reading of, you know, the potential for sort of evolutionary change, and that we're all sort of in this moment of change. And so I suppose ideally I would like my work to sort of follow in that way, and you know, document the strange time we're in of identity and landscape, and all these things seem to be in total shift right now, in a positive and negative way. And anyway, so hopefully something like that, we'll see.
That's great. You know, I'm reminded of a previous guest, Dr. Ron Wakari, who recently released a book about more than human worlds. And you know, when I read that title, I don't think about ants, but perhaps I should be. Number 5 is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it a lot, you know, I suppose just from having moved around so much. But by doing that, I've been able to see how different, you know, different places are, and the sort of, you know, the genius loci of the place, the sort of spirit of the place. And so location, I mean, what is location? You know, it's like, yeah, if everything's relative, you know, in some ways the portraits I think of as sort of like a location, it's a very specific location of that particular person. But then, you know, landscape level location, and then you know, also then the kind of planetary scale. You know, I did one series where I tried to paint all the planets in our solar system, and in a way they were big landscape paintings.
That's great. You know, I think we're getting more and more kind of color with this question, and you know, thinking about how we locate ourselves versus the geographic location is, of course, the question there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just, yeah, I mean, the geography is, yeah, I mean, I did a series of paintings in Spain for part of the pandemic. I was able to be somewhat isolated in Spain, and it was just an opportunity for me where I could sort of leave the studio completely, which is sort of at times sort of a placeless location, which can be wonderful because you can really go off into your ideas and have, you know, a certain amount of control over, or not control over, but there's a context, there's an open space in the studio. But when I went down to Spain, I painted outside for 5 months. And just with a classic kind of box, French box easel, hiking up into these mountains every day. And it was very sort of romantic in one level, but it was also just seemed like a good idea, because it seemed like such a wonderful way to really connect with that particular geography and that place. And in that particular place, it was, the geography had so much to tell, just in how the land was formed, but then also this is like southern Spain, southern Andalusia, and evidence of people living in the caves and in the mountains, and this sort of incredible sense of time that you can get from connecting with geography. And it's anyway, it was fascinating.
Fantastic. 6 is, if you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
I remember, showing up to Vancouver when I was 18, and I felt quite intimidated. It felt like I was sort of, coming from Calgary, it felt like I was in the big city or something. And I remember I took an art history class with Art Perry, which was a fantastic class. I mean, if anyone got you excited about painting and sculpture and all these things, it was certainly he was one of them. But I remember he was always talking about, these groups that would form, and from like, the Velvet Underground and his interest in that, to all these painters. And it seemed like obviously that you had to connect with all these amazing peers and in order to do anything interesting, And I think maybe then I found that quite daunting. And I think maybe there's a side of me that's a bit of always an outsider. And probably because of moving around so much. So I think in the beginning I was almost worried, like, well, how am I ever going to meet all these people, and I think maybe looking back, I would say, like, don't worry about that, just pursue it, and pursue the people you're interested in, and hang out with them. And looking back, I've been so lucky in that I've been able to meet so many amazing artists that have been able to, just be around them and show with them, maybe, if I was lucky, and maybe it wasn't something to worry about so much.
Nice. 7 is, what's a day in your life like?
It really depends. I mean, I seem to go in these cycles of researching or searching something out. Sometimes that just means in the library and in the archives, looking through things. Sometimes that means a motorcycle trip out to some destination, or there's sort of, at some point, it's like I realize I'm definitely not really making anything at the moment, and I'm just following some vague idea, it seems, most of the time in the beginning. And then I seem to get into a phase where there's a lot of tension because I haven't really figured out what it is, the project, I haven't found the project yet. Then at some point I start painting, and then it starts slowly building momentum, and it's not exactly a pleasant experience sometimes, that phase. And then at some point it seemed to get rolling. It seemed, so far so good, I guess. And then I'll get to, it's almost the most fun is when it's about 90% complete. And I love that feeling of really being in it at that point. It feels like, and the studio's full, and I'm hardly sleeping at that point. And I'm waking up pretty early, running to the studio, painting all day, going back, falling asleep, and repeat. And I love that phase. It's exhausting, but I'm never as active, and sort of at that point I've already made many of the decisions, or all I have to do is kind of get into it, because and make it, and then it seems to turn into something that's different than I could have planned at that point. So yeah, each day is really different, but it seems to kind of go in those types of cycles for me.
That's awesome. Seldom do we get such rich answers. That's a really good one. Number 8 is lifelong learning is a popular topic these days. How do you stay up to date?
I just try to pursue, the things I'm interested in, and just put in the time, sometimes, learning about things that really have nothing to do with my practice per se. But whether it's, struggling to learn German, or just becoming really interested in, astronomy, and getting obsessed with John Herschel for a week or something like this, I enjoy that, and I try to, search it out when I can.
Approaching halfway here, number 9. What tools do you use? Are you digital and analog?
I use the basic thing, for the paintings, just painting on oil paint on canvas. The wood sculptures are sometimes found pieces of wood, or pieces that I've cut and pieced together, and again just with paint. And the prints are I've made a lot of these copper plate etchings, and it's just I like these sort of basic tools in a way. I like the constraints of that to a point, but I also use computers too, but more in a way of making collages, or sort of coming up with ideas, or ideating things like this. And then once I start painting, it really goes into just the painting mode in a way.
Great. 10 is, how do you deal with work-life balance?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I guess just, keep the motorcycle keeps moving. It's going to stay upright. So I don't know.
I love that. 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
I'm not sure. I tried different things, when I was younger. Like in some ways, I think I could be happy painting houses, and or something like that. But I think it's more that there's nothing else I wanted to do more. I somehow really wanted to make paintings, and you don't always feel like that, of course, and most of the time you don't want to make paint, or I don't, or it's difficult. But there's moments where I was like, oh yeah, I really want to do this for some reason. I'm not sure why.
What would you not like to do in terms of career?
Yeah, that's a really tough one too. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's cool. I mean, sometimes that's the right answer. Number 13 is, what's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I really liked just one that comes to mind, like in Martin Scorsese's Bob Dylan documentary. Bob Dylan says something like, an artist has got to be careful never really to arrive at a place where he thinks he's at somewhere. You always have to realize that you're constantly in a state of becoming. As long as you can stay in that realm, you'll sort of be all right. So I think that, that somehow stuck with me. I like that, this, and, I think most of the artists, the painters I admired, had a certain quality to them in what they did. They allowed themselves to keep changing.
That's great. Recently we had John Maeda on, and in his book, How to Speak Machine, he talks about that incomplete phase and how that ends up being one of his 5 pillars, which is interesting.
Yeah, I really thought, I saw there was this incredible Munch, Edvard Munch exhibition I saw in Düsseldorf. What was it? It was just before the pandemic, late 2019. It's just an incredible show of these. Yeah, it was just stunning show. And you came into the last room, and there were this huge wall of these life-size, maybe 16 in a row, life-size tall portraits. They're absolutely incredible. And they were from different eras in his career, but you could really see in that show, I thought, how Munch really kept it just on the edge. I think there's a tendency to sort of fill in the square, whether you're painting or doing almost anything. There's something about that. We want to fill in the whole square, but Munch seemed to have that perfect awareness of right when he'd sort of suggested the fullness, but stopped. and left it open. And it was, wow, that was like, okay, that's, yeah, it was, he more than maybe anyone that I can think of in the moment, it really, really embodies that.
Do you have a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I don't know. I remember once at Emily Carr, just, talking to you, I'm thinking about Emily Carr and whatnot. And there's one teacher that said, I mean, it's not that bad. It's kind of funny. He said, Vancouver, if you can't make it here, you can't make it anywhere. Or if you can't make it there, you can't make it anywhere.
Yeah.
And it sort of filled me with dread. I think I was probably like 19 years old, like, oh man, like this is going to be bad. So
that's awesome. 15, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Curious, I suppose.
Perfect. 16, what keeps you up at night?
The bad nights, migraine headaches, definitely. The good ones, just like I say, like when I'm really kind of painting, finally really in the painting zone, I do find sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and have sometimes just like a real technical solution. Like I remember I was trying to figure out, I was struggling with how to paint the atmosphere of the Earth on this series of the planet paintings of all the planets in the solar system. And it seemed to me like, I mean, obviously the atmosphere of the Earth is very particular and unusual in compared to the other ones, and very important. So it was just like I couldn't figure out how to do it. But that one, I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was like, and I realized I could do this sort of combo with white to phthalo blue to black, and then be able to get the perfect or kind of show what I was looking for in that gradation, I guess. So I guess on the good days, it's because I'm just fired up and I don't want to sleep.
It's an awesome answer. So we're in the final stretch, number 17. What's a dream you're chasing?
Well, that outdoor group of paintings I made in Spain during part of the pandemic, there are all these small paintings that I made outside. So there's about 40 of them. And so I just finished a project here, and I rented a bigger studio for the winter. So I'm going to hopefully try to translate those into a series of larger works. And so that's somehow, that to me, like that whole time was such a weird time during the pandemic. And hiking into those hills, it did become something of a dream space, or it was something very real, but it had the sort of the escape of a dream. And so the challenge is, I guess, to kind of, chase that into the bigger painting, see if I can take it to the next, it sort of needs to go to the next phase for if it's going to work. So that's definitely what I'm, getting ready to chase here.
18, what inspires you?
I think probably like, well, it's just when you look really closely at something you think really well, and you find that kind of unusual detail in it that you didn't see before, that's nice.
Very cool. 19, any advice you'd like to share?
I think there's a friend of mine here in Calgary, and he started an ice cream company, and so years ago he told me he was starting this ice cream company. I was like, okay, like, all right, like we'll see how that goes. But he took 2 years to really figure out how to make the best ice cream he possibly could. And when I tasted it was somehow amazing. It was somehow exceptional. It really was next level. And then he started this company called Village Ice Cream, and it's been very successful for him. And I think the reason why is because he took his time, really. And it's hard to know, like as a painter, maybe it's not, what is the best ice cream, but and sometimes you're not ready, and you're not ready, but you're not ready because you haven't done it yet, So I think the advice is somehow try to trust your instincts, but try to make the best ice cream you can before you dive into it, take your time, I would say.
The neighborhood ice cream shop, if you're like going there. Number 20 is kind of a self-promotional bit, which you don't need, but it's how can our listeners keep tabs on you? How do we follow you?
Well, if you're in Alberta, I've got a couple of shows on right now. So one at Vivian Art in Calgary, and that's on till November 6th. And then I have 4 paintings and a sculpture at the Art Gallery of Alberta, and that's going to be going on until February 26th. So yeah, if you're in the province, check it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, Erik. I really feel that episode as much as I hear it. Your answers are life shifting. It's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.